My name is Ray. I'm a nurse, but not the kind you see on TV. No shiny hospital, no white coat, no fancy badge. I worked nights, long ones. 12 hours straight, sometimes more. My shoes were always sore from walking. My back ached from lifting. And my heart, well, it was tired too. I lived in a small, noisy apartment above a bakery. It always smelled like bread in the mornings, but that didn't make it any easier to pay rent. Every month was a new battle. I had loans, bills, and barely any savings. Sometimes dinner was just instant noodles and tap water. That was my normal. One rainy Monday, my agency called. They had a job for me. Private care. The client was an old man living in a big house outside the city. He was rich, they said. Alone too. No family nearby. They warned me he wasn't easy. He's sharp-tongued and stubborn. The woman on the phone said, "Most nurses don't last a week." I almost said no. I didn't want more stress. But I looked around my apartment. The leaking window, the broken heater, the empty fridge, and said yes. I needed money. I needed something to change. The next morning, I packed my bag and took the bus to the edge of town. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low and gray. The house was huge, old, and quiet. Ivy crawled up the stone walls like fingers. A housekeeper let me in. She didn't say much, just pointed down the hallway and whispered, "He's waiting." I walked into a room that felt more like a museum than a bedroom. Books lined the walls. The windows were big and dusty. And there he was, Mr. Halberd, sitting in a chair by the fire. He wore a robe and had a blanket over his legs. He didn't smile, didn't say hello, just looked at me with cold eyes, like he was sizing me up. "You're late," he said. I wasn't, but I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "Sorry." He turned his head away and muttered, "Don't talk unless I ask you to." Great start. The rest of the day was quiet, painfully quiet. I checked his medicine, helped him with lunch, and made sure he was warm. Every time I spoke, he ignored me. When I offered him water, he rang a small silver bell instead. When I tried to ask about his health, he just stared out the window. But I noticed something. On the small table beside his bed, there was a photo in a wooden frame. A woman, smiling, holding a sunflower. He looked at it more than he looked at me. Maybe she was his wife, I thought. Maybe that's why he was so bitter, because she was gone. I went home that night exhausted, not just in my body, but in my heart. I didn't know if I could do this. He was rude, cold, and clearly didn't want me there. But then I remembered the photo, the way he stared at it when he thought no one was watching. And something inside me whispered, "Stay." So I did. The next day, I arrived early. Mr. Halberd was already up, sitting in his chair by the fire again. He didn't look at me when I walked in, but I could tell he was waiting for me. I wasn't sure what to expect this time. Would he yell, ignore me? Or maybe, just maybe, he'd speak. I decided to take a different approach. Instead of diving straight into the usual tasks, I asked, "How are you feeling today, Mr. Halberd?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at the fire, the flames flickering in his tired eyes. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke. "Do you always ask stupid questions?" It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it wasn't a surprise either. I forced a smile and said, "I just want to make sure you're comfortable." He grunted. "I've been comfortable my whole life. I don't need your help." I nodded, trying not to take it personally. I had been a nurse long enough to know that some people just needed time. And besides, this wasn't about me. It was about him. I had to remember that. The day went on the same way. I helped him eat, made sure he had his medicine, and changed the sheets on his bed. He didn't say much, except for the occasional complaint about something being wrong or not right. The air between us felt thick, like he was a mountain and I was a pebble at his feet. But there was one thing I noticed. He would sometimes look at the photo of the woman again, the one on the small table beside his chair. His eyes softened for a moment, and I could almost see the years of sadness in them. In the afternoon, I went to the kitchen to make some tea. When I returned with the cup, Mr. Halberd was staring out the window, deep in thought. For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't look angry. He looked lost. "You know," he said slowly without turning to face me, "she was the best thing in my life. My wife. I didn't deserve her." I froze, unsure of what to say. His voice had changed, almost as if he was talking to himself more than to me. I didn't want to interrupt, so I waited. "I was a fool," he continued. "I made mistakes, hurt her, and now she's gone, and I'm left with nothing." I didn't know what to do with his words. It felt like I was hearing a secret he hadn't told anyone in years. I didn't want to push him, but I also didn't want to ignore him. So carefully I said, "I'm sure she loved you very much." He turned his head slightly, just enough to meet my gaze for a moment. It was a brief look, but in that second, I saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of something human. Regret, maybe, or hope. I wasn't sure. He didn't say anything else, just nodded once and turned his attention back to the window. The rest of the afternoon passed in a quiet lull. We didn't talk much, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing a part of him that wasn't just angry or cold. It was a crack in the wall he built around himself. As the sun began to set, Mr. Halberd asked, "Can you read to me?" I wasn't sure what he meant at first. "Read?" "Yes," he replied sharply. "Read something. I don't care what, just read." I smiled softly. "Okay, I'll find something." And that's how it started. That was the first time he asked me for something, anything. And though he still wasn't warm, it was a small step, a tiny crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart. The next day, I brought a book with me. It wasn't anything fancy, just a collection of short stories. I wasn't sure if Mr. Halberd would even be interested, but I thought it was worth a try. When I walked into his room, he was already sitting in his chair by the fire, looking out the window again. This time, though, he didn't seem as distant. His shoulders weren't as stiff, and his hands weren't gripping the arms of his chair quite so tightly. I approached him carefully, holding the book in my hands. "Would you like me to read something to you today, Mr. Halberd?" He glanced at me for a second, then gave a slow nod. "Fine. Read." I took a deep breath and opened the book. I read aloud, my voice steady, though a little unsure at first. I was so used to the quiet between us, to his sharp words and cold stares, that I wasn't sure how he'd react. But I pushed those thoughts aside. For now, it didn't matter. All that mattered was reading. As I read, I noticed something different. Mr. Halberd wasn't ignoring me. He wasn't staring off into space or looking bored. He was listening. His eyes were focused on the fire, but his expression softened. There was no sharpness in his gaze, no bitterness. For the first time, he seemed at peace. I kept reading, my voice filling the room with the rhythm of the words. It wasn't long before I noticed something else. He was starting to relax. His shoulders weren't so tense anymore. His hands weren't clenched in fists. It was as if the simple act of hearing a story had done something for him. I didn't know if it was the story itself or just the quiet company, but something had changed. After a while, I paused. "Do you want me to keep going, Mr. Halberd?" He didn't respond right away. He just stared at the fire, lost in thought. I almost thought he hadn't heard me, but then he spoke. "You can stop for now," he said quietly, "but bring the book again tomorrow." I smiled to myself. It was small, but it was a start. He wanted me to come back. He wanted to hear the stories. I felt a warmth in my chest that I couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was because, for the first time since I'd met him, I didn't feel like I was just a nurse doing her job. I felt like I was connecting with him in some way. The next few days were more of the same. I read to him every afternoon. Sometimes we talked about the stories, and other times we just sat in silence after. But even in the silence, I could tell that something was changing in him. He didn't speak as much, but he didn't snap at me either. He didn't ask for much, but he started asking for little things, like more tea or a blanket when it got too cold. One afternoon, I brought a new book, a novel this time. When I walked in, Mr. Halberd was sitting by the fire again, staring out the window. But today, when I asked if he wanted me to read, he didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "Read. I'm listening." As I started reading, I couldn't help but feel a small shift inside me. It wasn't just him that was changing. I was starting to understand him too. I was beginning to see past the old man who seemed so bitter and lonely. I was starting to see the person he used to be, the one who had loved and lost, the one who had regrets, the one who had built walls around his heart to keep from getting hurt again. And as I read, I couldn't help but wonder. Maybe, just maybe, I was helping him tear those walls down. One afternoon, as I was changing Mr. Halberd's sheets, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a small journal tucked under his pillow. It was old, the cover cracked and faded with time. I almost didn't touch it, thinking it was private, but my curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up gently and flipped it open. The pages were filled with tiny, neat handwriting, and as I skimmed through, I realized it was his. The first few entries talked about business, meetings, and decisions he'd made in the past. They were written in a way that felt distant, like he was recording events without any real emotion. But as I read further, the tone shifted. The writing became more personal, more raw. It was clear that something had changed in him. One entry caught my eye. It was dated years ago, right around the time his wife had passed away. "I can't believe she's gone. I don't know how to breathe without her. She always made me feel like I mattered, like I was someone worth loving. I was a fool to let her go. Now she's gone, and I'm left with nothing. Not even the courage to fix my mistakes." I closed the journal quickly, my heart heavy. It was as if I'd opened a window into a part of his life he never shared. The pain in those words was so clear, so raw. I didn't know what to do with it. I had always thought of Mr. Halberd as cold, unfeeling, but now I saw a man who had loved deeply and lost everything because of his own choices. Later that evening, as I sat with him, I couldn't help but wonder if he had ever told anyone about those feelings. Had he shared his regrets with anyone, or had he locked them away, just like that journal? As I sat there reading to him, he seemed quieter than usual. I wondered if he was thinking about his wife again, thinking about all the years he had spent alone, regretting the choices he had made. I decided to ask, carefully. "Mr. Halberd," I said, my voice soft, "you never really talk about her. Was she the love of your life?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes were focused on the fire, and for a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "She was everything to me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I pushed her away. I thought I could be strong on my own. I was wrong." There was a heaviness in his voice that I hadn't heard before. It was the first time he had ever spoken so openly, so honestly, and for a moment, it felt like I was no longer just a nurse taking care of him. I felt like I was a part of something bigger, something real. I wanted to say more, to tell him that it wasn't too late, that maybe he could find peace, but I didn't know how. So I just sat there, silently, as he stared into the fire. We didn't speak for the rest of the evening, but the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like we had both shared something unspoken. The next day, I returned to the house with a new sense of understanding. Mr. Halberd wasn't just a grumpy old man. He was someone who had loved and lost, someone who carried his regrets like heavy stones in his heart. I didn't know how much longer he had left, but I was determined to help him find some peace, even if it was just in the small moments we shared. The days grew shorter as winter came. The house was cold, even with the fire burning in the fireplace. Mr. Halberd's health started to decline more quickly. He seemed weaker, his breathing harder, his steps slower. I could see it in his eyes, too. He was tired, much more tired than before. It was like the weight of all those years had finally caught up with him. The doctor came more often, giving me advice on how to care for him. "Just keep him comfortable," she said softly. "There's nothing more we can do." I didn't want to believe her. I kept hoping that somehow things would get better. Maybe it was just a bad winter, I thought. Maybe it wasn't as serious as the doctor said. But deep down, I knew she was right. Mr. Halberd didn't have much time left. One evening, he called me into his room. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Ray," he said, his eyes looking more tired than ever. "I want to tell you something." I leaned in, not sure what to expect. He rarely spoke much anymore, but when he did, it was always important. "I've lived a long life," he began slowly, his words careful. "And I've made many mistakes. I didn't always treat people the way they deserved, and I didn't always do what I should have done. But you've been different." His words caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say. I didn't feel like I had done anything special, just my job. But Mr. Halberd wasn't finished. "You've shown me kindness when I didn't deserve it," he continued, his voice shaky. "You didn't give up on me, even when I pushed you away. And for that, I'm grateful. I've never really been grateful for much in my life. But now, I am." Tears stunned my eyes, though I tried to hide them. I wasn't used to seeing Mr. Halberd this way, vulnerable, open. He had always been so strong, so proud. Now, in the quiet of his room, I saw a man who had come to terms with his own regrets. "It's okay," I whispered. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing my job." He shook his head weakly. "It's more than that. Ray, you've been a light in my darkness, something I didn't know I needed." We sat there in silence for a long time, just listening to the crackling of the fire. It was a peaceful moment, one that I would always remember. It felt like a moment of healing, not just for him, but for me too. Because in that moment, I realized that I had made a difference in his life, even if I hadn't known how much at the time. The next few days were harder. Mr. Halberd's condition worsened, and I knew we were nearing the end. I did everything I could to make him comfortable, adjusting the blankets, offering him water, sitting with him while he rested. I read to him, like I always did, but the stories felt different now. They weren't just words. They were a way for him to hold on to something, anything, as his body grew weaker. One night, as I sat beside him, I noticed that he was breathing more slowly, more faintly. It was a quiet night. No sounds but the wind outside and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. "Mr. Halberd," I whispered, gently touching his hand. "Are you awake?" He didn't respond, but his hand tightened around mine just slightly, as if to let me know he was still there. And in that moment I knew. He was ready. Ready to rest, ready to let go. He had lived a full life, full of mistakes and regrets, but also moments of love and joy. I hoped that, in the end, he would find peace. Mr. Halberd passed away quietly in the middle of the night. It wasn't sudden, but it still felt like the world shifted. I stayed with him until the morning, sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. There was no noise except for the soft tick of the clock on the wall. It felt peaceful, like he had finally found the rest he deserved. After the funeral, the house was empty. The staff left, and everything went quiet again. I had already said my goodbyes, but there was still something weighing on me. I felt like there was more to Mr. Halberd's story, something I hadn't fully understood yet, something he had wanted to say, but never had the chance to. One afternoon, about a week after his passing, I was going through his things. His room was still the same, cold and silent, but somehow different without him in it. As I sorted through his belongings, I came across the old journal again. But this time, something else caught my attention. It was a letter, sealed with an old wax stamp. The paper was yellowed and fragile, as if it had been tucked away for years. I sat down on the bed, carefully opening the envelope. The letter inside was written in Mr. Halbert's familiar handwriting. It looked old, like it had been written a long time ago. As I read, my heart skipped a beat. It was a letter to his wife, the woman he had loved so deeply. "My dearest Emily," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I fear it is already too late. I have made so many mistakes in my life, and I am sorry for every one of them. I was proud and foolish, and I let you slip through my fingers. You were the best part of me, and I never told you that enough. I took you for granted, and now I must live with that regret. Please know that I never stopped loving you. You were the light of my life, and I will carry that love with me forever. If I could go back, I would change everything. But I can't. All I have now is the hope that you knew, deep down, how much you meant to me." As I finished reading the letter, a lump formed in my throat. It was clear that Mr. Halbert had spent his whole life regretting the loss of his wife. He had never been able to move on, even after all these years. The letter was a final confession, a piece of his soul that he had never shared with anyone, not even me. I sat there for a long time, the letter clutched in my hands, thinking about everything Mr. Halbert had gone through. He had lived with his regrets, and maybe in the end, that was what made him so distant. He had never forgiven himself for what he had done. But now I understood him better. I understood why he had been so difficult, why he had pushed people away. He had been protecting himself from the pain of losing the one person he had truly loved, and he had never been able to let go of that pain. I placed the letter back in the envelope, feeling like I was holding a piece of his heart. I thought about what I could do with it. Should I tell someone about it? Should I keep it as a memory of a man who had been so hard to love, but who had needed love more than anyone? In the end, I decided to keep it. It was his story, his truth, and I would carry it with me. And as I left the house for the last time, I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe Mr. Halbert had never found the forgiveness he was looking for, but somehow I felt like he had found a little bit of peace in the end. After Mr. Halbert's passing, things started to settle into a new routine. I moved on with my life, but a part of me stayed connected to him. I didn't realize it at first, but I had been changed by my time with him. I couldn't shake the lessons he had taught me, even without saying much. The way he had lived his life, the way he had loved and lost, had left an impression on me. A few months later, I received a letter. It was strange, because I hadn't expected any more contact from the estate. But this letter wasn't from the lawyer or anyone official. It was from a woman named Sarah Halbert. I opened it carefully, feeling a sense of curiosity and unease. As I read, my eyes widened. Sarah Halbert is the daughter of Mr. Halbert's late sister. The letter began, "I've been going through old family records and letters, and I came across your name. I understand that you cared for my uncle in his final days, and I wanted to reach out to you. He never spoke much about his past, but I believe he trusted you more than anyone else." The letter went on to explain that Sarah had been living overseas for many years and had only recently learned of her uncle's passing. She wanted to meet me, to thank me for taking care of him during his final days. She mentioned that she had some old family stories to share, things about Mr. Halbert's younger years, and some details about his regrets. I was taken aback. I hadn't expected this, but I knew it was something I had to do. I had learned so much about Mr. Halbert's life, and now it seemed like I was about to learn even more. A few days later, Sarah and I met at a small cafe. She was kind, warm, and surprisingly open. We talked for hours about her uncle, about the family, and about the things she had learned over the years. She told me about how Mr. Halbert had always been quiet about his feelings, always hiding his emotions behind a wall. But even so, she remembered how he had been a loving brother and how much he had cared for his family. As we spoke, Sarah handed me a small box. It was old, like something that had been passed down through generations. She said it had been her uncle's, and that she thought I should have it. Inside the box was a necklace, simple but beautiful. It had a small locket with a picture of a woman inside. It was clear that the woman in the picture was his wife, The woman he had loved so much. I think he would have wanted you to have it, Sarah said softly. He never could bring himself to part with it, but he always said that the one thing he regretted most was losing her. Tears filled my eyes. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after all the silence and the walls he had built around himself, Mr. Halbert had wanted me to have this. I had never expected such a gift, never expected such a deep connection. As I looked at the necklace, I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. Mr. Halbert's life had been full of regrets, yes, but he had also had love. He had loved deeply, and in the end, that love was the one thing that mattered most. He had found peace, even if it took him a lifetime. Sarah and I parted ways that day, and I kept the necklace with me always. It became a symbol of everything I had learned during my time with Mr. Halbert. That no matter how many mistakes we make, how much time we lose, love is the one thing that stays with us. Love is the thing that can heal us, even after all these years. And as I went on with my life, I knew that I would never forget the old man who had changed me, who had taught me that even in silence, there was always a story to be heard. It had been several months since I had met Sarah Halbert, and life had started to feel different. I thought about Mr. Halbert often, how his life had been filled with both love and regret, and how his passing had left a mark on me. I was no longer the same person I had been when I first walked into his home. Taking care of him had taught me more than I could have ever imagined, and I was ready for something new. I knew it was time for me to move forward, to find my own path, but I also realized that I wanted to help others in the same way I had helped him. The experience had opened my eyes to the quiet struggles people faced, struggles that often went unnoticed. I had been a nurse, yes, but I felt a deeper calling now, a desire to make a bigger difference, not just in someone's physical health, but in their emotional well-being as well. With that in mind, I decided to go back to school. It wasn't easy. I had to juggle classes with work, and sometimes it felt like I was drowning in responsibilities. But every time I felt exhausted, I thought about Mr. Halbert, about how much he had changed me. I remembered the way he had slowly let me in, how he had shared his deepest regrets with me, and how, in the end, he had found peace. That thought kept me going. One day, after a long day of classes and work, I sat down at my kitchen table to study. The necklace Mr. Halbert had given me rested on the table beside my textbooks. I hadn't worn it in a while, but tonight I decided to put it on. As soon as I clasped it around my neck, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was as though his presence was still with me, guiding me, reminding me that I wasn't alone on this journey. A few weeks later, I was walking home from the library when I saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was Sarah. She was standing outside a small cafe, looking as if she were waiting for someone. When she saw me, she smiled and waved. I walked over to her, feeling a strange sense of connection. "Hey, Ray," she said warmly. "How have you been?" I smiled back, feeling like I had so much to say. "I've been good. Actually, things have been changing. I'm going back to school, studying to become a therapist." Her eyes lit up. "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks," I said, feeling a rush of excitement. I want to help people like my uncle, people who are carrying around their regrets and fears, but who don't know how to let them go. We stood there for a moment, the sound of the city bustling around us, but I felt like time had slowed down. It felt like everything was falling into place. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a small piece of paper. "This is for you," she said, handing it to me. "It's an address. My family has a little house upstate. It's been empty for years, but I think it's time for someone to live there again. I want you to have it if you need a place to go." I looked at her, surprised. "Are you sure?" "It's yours," she said with a smile. "It's what my uncle would have wanted." I stood there, holding the paper in my hand, overwhelmed by the kindness of both her and Mr. Halbert. They had given me more than just a house. They had given me the opportunity to start fresh, to find a new chapter in my life. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally ready to take that step. A few days later, I packed my things and headed upstate. The small house was old but charming, surrounded by trees and peace. As I walked through the front door, I knew this was where I was meant to be. It felt like the beginning of something new, something hopeful. And as I looked out the window at the beautiful landscape stretching before me, I smiled. I knew that no matter where life took me, I would always carry the lessons I learned from Mr. Halbert. His story had changed me, and now it was my turn to write my own.